When you hear about the Wild West today, you probably think of cowboys herding cattle across the plains, Native Americans on war paths, and the occasional shootout at the OK Corral. There's no denying that this is all true, but it's only a small part of the story, from disease outbreaks to savage attacks. Here are 20 brutal facts about daily life in the Wild West that they don't tell you. 1. Forget gold. It was all about the lead. During the mid-19th century, people flocked to the western United States in the hopes of striking it rich. In California alone, over 300,000 fortune hunters headed out west after gold was discovered in 1848. But there was more to the boom than just gold. In fact, most of the wealth generated during the gold rush came from supplying the miners with the tools they needed to extract the precious metals. This included everything from food and clothing to whiskey and, most importantly, lead for ammunition. While only an estimated 3% of the fortune hunters actually struck gold, those who didn't still walked away with a decent profit by supplying the 3% that did. Number 2. Hanging around. In the Old West, justice was not only swift, it was often carried out by civilians. As towns grew and the population became denser, law enforcement became more important than ever before. But while modern police forces were beginning to take shape, the Wild West was patrolled by bounty hunters and, when necessary, ordinary citizens. If convicted of a crime, it was common for the accused to be given the option to buy their way out of jail with money or by hanging. And if the judge and jury decided that your crimes were particularly heinous, you wouldn't even get the option. No. 3. Death by disease. If you've watched enough westerns, you probably think that everyone in the Old West died violent and bloody deaths. And while gunfights were certainly common, a much more common way to go was through disease. In fact, in the early days of the gold rush, more men died from disease and cholera than from bullets and fists. Poor sanitation, crowded living conditions, and lack of basic medical knowledge led to rampant disease outbreaks that could wipe out entire mining camps. For example, in 1850, San Francisco was hit with a particularly bad cholera epidemic that claimed an estimated 3,000 lives, which was nearly 10% of the city's population at the time. 4. Bear baiting. If you ask any wildlife expert, they will tell you that bears are among the most dangerous animals in North America. In fact, bear attacks are relatively common, especially in regions where humans and wildlife habitats overlap. And in the late 1800s, there was a pretty easy way to bait bears into populated areas. Garbage. In cities, bears would raid trash cans and dumps in search of food. And when they couldn't find enough to eat, they would target livestock and even people. Because of these attacks, authorities offered bounties on bear hides, which incentivized hunters to kill as many bears as possible. Today, however, we know that bears are capable of being rehabilitated and can live happy and healthy lives in captivity. So rather than offering bounties on their heads, most zoos simply feed their bears a balanced diet of fish, berries, and vegetables. No. 5. Deadly hogs. If bears weren't enough, the Old West also had another large and aggressive beast to contend with: wild boars. These huge hogs were brought to North America by Spanish explorers in the 16th century and quickly multiplied, thanks to a lack of natural predators. As the years went on, these feral pigs grew larger and more aggressive, and by the 19th century, they were considered a menace to public health and safety. Their sharp tusks and powerful hooves made them extremely dangerous, and it wasn't uncommon for them to trample entire settlements. To make matters worse, these wild hogs were incredibly fast and could easily outrun any human on foot. In order to combat the growing threat, authorities organized hunting parties whose sole purpose was to track down and kill as many wild boars as possible. In some cases, this proved to be easier said than done, as one man found out the hard way. No. 6. A town destroyed by mail. It was a typical day in the town of Mountain City, Texas. The year was 1881, and the residents were going about their daily business as usual. Suddenly, A stagecoach pulled up to the jailhouse, and two men stepped out. They were U.S. Marshals who had come to arrest a wanted man. What happened next was anything but typical. When the marshals entered the jail, the town's sheriff and his 3 deputies opened fire. This started a gunfight that lasted several hours and resulted in the death of both marshals and 5 of the 6 lawmen. But the incident didn't end there. In retaliation, the U.S. government sent a military unit to occupy the town and punish those responsible for the massacre. What followed was one of the most brutal occupations in American history. Soldiers went house to house, stealing food, destroying property, and beating residents. They continued to do this until the town's leaders agreed to leave, at which point the military took over the town entirely. 7. We all know that cowboys rode horses in the Old West, but did you know that women did too? In fact, some female cowboys were among the best in the business. One such woman was Mary Fields, who worked as a stagecoach driver in Montana Territory in the 1890s. Despite facing constant sexism and danger, she successfully delivered the mail for years, eventually earning the nickname Stagecoach Mary. Another famous female cowboy was Calamity Jane, who worked as a scout and guide for the U.S. Army during the Indian Wars. She was known for her incredible horsemanship skills and her ability to survive in the harshest environments. No. 8. A real-life zombie. In the spring of 1876, a group of German immigrants were working in a copper mine in Wisconsin. One of the miners was named Johann, and he had been suffering from poor health for some time. On April, he stopped working and went back to his cabin. At first, everyone assumed that he had died of a fever, but what happened next turned this case into a medical mystery. Several weeks later, Johann was reported to have risen from the dead and attacked his neighbors. To make matters worse, it wasn't just a one-time thing. This supposed zombie attacked again the following night and again for several months. Eventually, doctors were called in to investigate. They diagnosed him with a rare neurological condition called Cotard's syndrome, which causes the sufferer to believe that they are dead. 9. A taster of things to come. In the 19th century, few things were more luxurious than ice cream, and to keep their desserts cool, wealthy families would rent ice boxes to store their perishables. Then, in 1838, a new invention hit the market that could do the same thing at a fraction of the cost. The refrigerator. But the first refrigerators weren't like the ones we use today. Instead of using artificial refrigerants, they used poisonous chemicals called hydrochlorofluorocarbons. These chemicals are infamous for damaging the ozone layer and contributing to global warming. Luckily, we stopped using them in the 1990s and switched to environmentally friendly alternatives. Yes, the first supermodel. In the Victorian era, there was a growing demand for beautiful women who could serve as models for artists. And no woman was more in demand than Kate Morsman. Born in 1848, Morsman became famous for her long neck, slender frame, and tiny waist. But her modeling career came to a sudden end when she was found guilty of murdering her husband. She was sentenced to death by hanging, but her sentence was reduced to life in prison after she gave birth to the couple's child. Number 11. Wild Bill's demise. He was a legendary figure of the Old West, known for his incredible gunfighting skills and his love of whiskey and women. But how did Wild Bill Hickok die? Well, the circumstances surrounding his death are a little murky, but here's what we know. On August 1876, Hickok was playing poker in a saloon when he was approached by a mysterious stranger. The two got into a game and Hickok was dealt a pair of aces and eights, also known as the dead man's hand. He won the hand, but soon after, he was shot and killed by the stranger. But why? Well, some say that the stranger was just a hitman hired to kill Hickok. Others believe that Hickok cheated during the poker game and the stranger was there to confront him. Whatever the truth may be, Hickok's death remains one of the most infamous in Western history. Number 12. The Great Yellowstone Fires. In the summer of 1888, wildfires swept through Yellowstone National Park, leaving a devastating path of destruction in their wake. Over 2 million acres of forest were burned, which was 25% of the park's total area. What made these fires so devastating was that they occurred just 1 year after Yellowstone had become the world's first national park. The fires caused widespread damage to the park's infrastructure and threatened to derail the fledgling park service. However, the fires also had a positive impact on the park's ecosystem, clearing out underbrush and creating a mosaic of habitats that is still present today. Number 13. Gold and the environment. You'd be surprised at how much gold is actually in your everyday items. In fact, a single iPhone contains between 10 and 15 grams of the precious metal. This is because gold is an excellent conductor of electricity and is highly resistant to corrosion. So, it's often used in electronic devices. But mining for gold is a messy process that can have devastating effects on the environment. In the 1800s, prospectors used a technique called hydraulic mining to extract gold from rivers and streams. This involves spraying high-pressure water at riverbanks to erode away the sediment and expose the gold underneath. But this practice had a devastating impact on local ecosystems, causing erosion, sedimentation, and the destruction of fish habitat. Today, hydraulic mining is illegal in most places, but the damage that was done is still felt today. 14. Where are they now? Wyatt Earp is one of the most famous lawmen of all time, thanks to his involvement in the legendary shootout at the OK Corral. But what happened after the gunfight? Well, not much. After the dust settled, Earp continued to work as a lawman in various frontier towns, but his career was short-lived and he eventually moved to California, where he spent his remaining days gambling and fighting in bare-knuckle boxing matches. His brother, Virgil, on the other hand, retired from law enforcement and lived out the remainder of his life on his ranch in Kansas. Kingsley, the last mustache. In the mid-1800s, facial hair was all the rage. Men of all social classes sported mustaches, beards, and sideburns. But the trend took a dark turn. When the Civil War broke out, mustaches became a symbol of the Confederacy and the Union began a campaign to shave them off. Soldiers on both sides were forced to shave or have their whiskers cut off by military barbers. But this wasn't just a symbolic gesture. Removing Confederate soldiers' facial hair was a way of humiliating them and breaking their morale. Number 16. Deadly snakes. If you're afraid of snakes, the Old West was probably the absolute worst time to be alive. That's because venomous snake bites were a leading cause of death out west. And with so many different species of deadly snakes, it's no wonder people were afraid. Rattlesnakes, copperheads, and cottonmouths were just some of the snakes that called the Old West home, and their bites could be deadly if left untreated. People who were bitten by snakes often died horrible and painful deaths. There was no antivenom available, so the best hope for survival was to suck the venom out of the wound. But this rarely worked, and most people bit by venomous snakes died. There's a sketchy Buffalo Bill's legacy. He was a legendary frontiersman and the star of his own Wild West show. But what is Buffalo Bill's real legacy? Well, it's complicated. On the one hand, he was a skilled hunter and tracker who helped open up the West to settlement. He was also a showman and an entrepreneur who created one of the most popular attractions of his day. But he was also a racist and a bigot who perpetuated harmful stereotypes about Native Americans. His Wild West shows were essentially glorified sideshows that featured non-white performers in costumes and makeup meant to mock them. In addition, he was a key figure in the slaughter of buffalo, which was a deliberate attempt to destroy the Native Americans' main source of food and clothing. So what is Buffalo Bill's legacy? Well, it depends on who you ask. Some see him as a hero of the Old West, while others view him as a villain. Number 80. The mysterious disappearance. The year is 1870 and you are walking down the street when you suddenly hear a blood-curdling scream. You rush to the nearest window and see a man standing on the edge of a building. He looks down and disappears. What just happened? Did he fall off the building? No. See, the man was standing on the roof of a house, and that house had no roof. In reality, the man jumped onto the roof of the house below and disappeared from sight. There's another lynching in the West. Lynching was a common form of punishment in the Old West, often used to deal with criminals who had escaped from jail. In some cases, it was also used as a way to deal with people who were suspected of crimes, even if they were innocent. This was because lynching was seen as a quick and easy way to dispense justice without having to go through a lengthy legal process. Victims of lynching were usually hanged or shot, and their bodies were often left up as a warning to other would-be criminals. Vinci, the price of progress. During the 1800s, the United States was rapidly industrializing. Factories were popping up across the country and people were flocking to cities in search of jobs. But this rapid industrialization came at a cost. The air and water became polluted, and living conditions in the cities were often cramped and unsanitary. As people began to realize the downsides of industrialization, a movement emerged to protect the natural environment. But it wasn't an easy fight. Many powerful interests, including factory owners and railroad executives, stood to lose a lot of money if the government began regulating industry. But eventually, the environmental movement began to gain traction. And in the early 1900s, the United States passed its first laws protecting the environment. That's all for today. See you next time.